To begin this seminar, I want to take the time to acknowledge that whilst I have researched this topic, I myself in no way am a Pacific Islander. I think it's important to state this to begin with, for I'm about to set some issues and pathways that can help us as inspiring teachers to better understand and acknowledge the identities of many Pacific Islander students, to essentially help build um, better relationships with Pacific Islands and the many different cultural backgrounds within the Pacific, but also just to suggest some very core, I believe, important values that New Zealand and Aotearoa as a whole can take upon to really better understand who students are and their identities, and to essentially help grow those. With this, my suggestions are simply from a research perspective. I in no way am wanting to speak on behalf of all Pacifica experiences or experiences with teachers or within the educational institutions. I'm merely just wanting to expand my own knowledge on the peoples of Aotearoa, and also to speak about issues that I have found in my own research on this topic of why Pacific students aren't achieving within schools. I feel like it was important to begin with a statement because, again, I'm no way, from Tonga, Samoa, or Tokelau, or any at all, the Cook Islands. I do not understand the difficulty of really being forced to assimilate to a Western framework of knowledge. For I've grown into it, and it's a privilege in itself, right? My white skin, like I've been able to adapt to this system because it's just been there available for me to grow within. With that, let's get into it. For many Pacifica families, education is seen as highly valuable and important. With this, many Pacifica families acknowledge the necessity of higher education, and so many Pacifica families are pushing their children to really achieve for good grades. They have good communication with their children, or they're pushing for communication with their children. This is seen within Camila Nikai's, I believe that might be how it's pronounced, article where she interviewed 3 different Pacifica students and essentially asked them about their, educational background, and a lot of these students came back saying, that their parents were incredibly supportive of school. They're always nagging them, asking, if they've done their homework and things like that. So with that, we cannot blame families for the failings of their children. This is not the case for this low achievement rate. So why is it that many Pacifica students, even though they aim to achieve within education, find themselves overrepresented throughout census data for failure within educational institutions? Why is this the case? I also want to focus on the fact that as inspiring educators, it's important for us to really look deeper into the institutions in itself, because this is the core issue, these institutions in themselves. We need to be actively looking to address these issues and really, really challenge the status quo. By having Pacifica students failing within tertiary and high school levels, it strongly suggests that there is something wrong with these pathways, especially when they're, dominating census data for underachievement. It's not just a small amount, it's been persistently low. Something wrong is happening here, and it's clearly not the students that are completely at fault. It's this institutional setting. It's definitely this institutional setting. So why has it become so alienating? Why is education alienating students? I think it's failing because, this Western framework of education is so based around, individual achievement, individual success, and that these core values are so frameworked around you are individually by default on your own. Everything is you. Everything that you do is you and your problem. That a lot of this knowledge or perspective is lost, like Pacific perspectives and like Western ideologies, around family, whānau, they're all completely taken away, and a lot of knowledge is essentially just streamlined. Like you have um, more emphasis on things like English, Western histories, and all these different things, and subjects like maybe learning Samoan or Tongan or Tokelauan. These options are not necessarily within the curricula. Um, it's essentially alienating students, forcing them to assimilate to different cultural perspectives. Students are not culturally able to really truly express themselves or create their own pathways, which is the general center point of this. Within Camila Nakeed's article, she expresses that it is essential for Pacifica students to be able to construct, acknowledge their understandings of self within educational institutions. Um, teachers and schools need to really have tools available to allow students to really, connect with themselves and their own reputations of who they wish to be, and to continue to grow that. This cannot be achieved as schools continue to ignore time and time again the different cultural perspectives and see everybody as a blank slate that needs to be educated correctly within the name of Western, ideologies of success, and what, being on your own, and working for yourself. There's this big divide and clash because that's not what a lot of the Pacific Islands are based around. And that can be completely alienating, being forced into a setting that is not your own, and the teacher doesn't understand who you are or what your background is, and they're not willing to say hello to you, things like that. They will alienate you. You don't want to be part of the school. You are not within the school's picture of success. By denying or excluding the importance of one's cultural identity and forcing students to adapt to different cultural frameworks, it negates a sense of trust, making learning environments alienating, hostile for many Pacific students. They are silencing the growth of one's cultural background. I think Konai Helu Taman describes this really, really well. She describes in her article this idea of when she was going to many different, institutions, she would have to basically take off her coat, hang it up on a tree, and then go into the school because she didn't feel like she could be herself and confidently be a Pacific Islander and have a Pacific Islander identity within the system because she felt like it was being judged, or there was nothing there to those viewpoints feel like they were cut off completely. There was nothing there suggesting that this is an environment for Pacifica. And this, I think, goes again to the key idea that another key idea for schools and teachers, that they don't really have strong relationships with their teachers, students, Pacifica students, which is really sad. Students and teachers should be ideally learning from one another, having discussions and encouraging all students to contribute to the classroom, and just understanding them, talking to them, seeing how they're doing, building strong relationships, understanding their identities, who they are, who they want to be, and understanding that family backgrounds, having discussions with family, because that's all very important for the Pacific, and those need to be highlighted. I mean, from Nakeed's article, she talks to a few teachers as well, besides students, like this guy called Murray, who blames the socioeconomic status and also just the parents, like they're not involved, which is not the case. Clearly, from before when I mentioned, the the parents are always, want to know how they're doing in school. They want them to get good grades. They want to succeed. I think it is important though that socioeconomic status, that is technically an issue and does lead to student success, but that isn't the only. If that's the baseline and you're not putting any effort in as a teacher to build a strong relationship with your pupil and to make them feel comfortable in the classroom, they are going to not succeed. They're going to fail because they don't feel like they're being represented. And that's then itself leads to the other issue of there's not enough Pacifica representation within the classrooms. That's completely gone. There's not enough teachers. Well, it's not gone. There's just not enough teachers really focusing on that, and there's just not enough teachers there really. There's not enough representation. Pacifica students would feel much more comfortable probably with teachers that are Pacific Islander, because Pacifica teachers do understand, those values. They've grown up they've grown up with those identities. They understand them. They can acknowledge them. They can work with them. And if that's not there available to students, they're going to feel like they're not going to feel like they belong. So I'm going back up again and homing in this idea that I fundamentally believe that we need to build strong relationships with Pacifica youth, and going that extra mile to understand and help students reflect upon their own identities Pacifica, which will allow for students to have the chance to grow and choose identities within academia and flat out the door, to show support and understand that of the student's identity and allow that to continually grow. I also believe that we need more Pacifica teachers, and that by having more Pacifica teachers, will create wider success and more values of the Pacific to be seen within academia. I think those are just clearly important, and we do need to focus on those as a country and as educators. I think just for educators like myself, not being from the Pacific, it's more important to understand the students, talk to them, learn about the islands, learn about their cultural identity, their family background, and how they feel, and encourage them to do things that may, if not, if they're not doing well in English, maybe suggesting books to them, that are from Pacifica, authors like Albert Wendt or someone like that, that maybe understands that cultural background, especially if that is important to them, right? Just understanding who they are as individuals and working with that is such an important framework. With that, I'm going to end the seminar. Thank you.